Wonderful. Okay, so Mariam, if you're ready to start presenting, I'm just going to share the
Sure.
screen and you just let me know whenever you want me to move through the slides. Can everybody see the benefits of inclusive design? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, fabulous. Yeah, over to you, Mariam.
Okay.
Oh,
Great.
sorry, just disappeared. Uh, 1 second.
I'll just say that I might speak quite fast because there's a lot to cover. I think I only have, is it 10 minutes, Marta?
Yeah, probably 10, 15 minutes and then we'll do
Yeah.
some questions. So yeah.
Um, and I think there's 9 slides, so I'll, I'll speak relatively fast, but hopefully clear. So yeah, benefits of inclusive design. Um, I think wheelchair access is often what comes to mind when discussing accessibility in gardens, and that's because it's an important consideration. But actually, everyone benefits from well-designed garden paths. People with vision impairments or balance issues, like myself, people on crutches, and even people like the gardeners lugging around watering cans or pushing a wheelbarrow, all appreciate smooth, level, easily navigable paths. Um, yeah, there's the things I say might not be the same things as on the slides, so you might want to read the slides while I'm talking. But we can go to the next one, Marta. So we've got path sizes. So the path sizes on this page are like UK regulation sizes for wheelchair access and for wheelchair turning. So it's kind of self-explanatory, really. The larger the size of the path, the better in terms of accessibility. And like I said, not just for the wheelchair users, but for families or groups that want to walk together. Having larger paths just allows for a bit more accessibility. And just on this page are some examples of what those paths look like to scale. So you can see how small a half a meter path is compared to a 3 meter path, and like what can and can't really be done on this kind of sizes of paths. Next one. So we're going to talk a bit about material options for paths. I'm not going to be able to cover everything, so just bear that in mind. But these are basically the key features when you're choosing path materials. So regardless of what you're choosing, if you think of these key features for inclusive paths, you'll kind of be on the right path. Yeah, so firm, level, stable path surfaces are best. Slip resistant, avoid anything that will be slippery when wet. Make sure the sub base is properly excavated and laid so the surface doesn't rot or paving stones slip and tip. Use non-glare materials. Water should drain freely from the path surface, and paths should have a slight crossfall to shed water. So some of the materials are ones that you might not like and ones that you might like more, but I've tried to be inclusive with my material choices. So we've got concrete, which is one of those materials people really love to hate, but I think it does have its purpose. And um, in terms of pathways, it's pretty much a good solution that ticks most of the boxes. It can be quite expensive, but it's really, really durable, and it's also really malleable. So you can make it flow, follow any lines, and you can even have moldings to make it look like stone, as you can see in these pictures. Um, you're probably aware that it's not very good for the planet, especially if you don't use it for its full lifetime. And with community gardens, I know that sites can change quite rapidly and paths need to be moved. So it might not be the best option, especially if you're just starting out. Um, and also, you need to be really careful where you're putting concrete. If you're putting it near trees with large roots, it can crack and buckle. Um, and then we have asphalt, which is another material that's not very liked, but I wanted to cover it. I've not honestly seen it used that much in community gardens, but it is an option, and you can opt for recycled versions. And I think they use road asphalt in the recycled versions. Um, yeah, it will get kind of smelly and sticky if it gets very, very hot, which I don't think we kind of experience in that in this country, but we do experience some heat, and it can, because of that, it can kind of get very hot itself to the touch and kind of off gas a bit. So not great, but it's an option. Next page, please. So these are kind of crushed stone paths. And honestly, these are my personal favorite options and probably the ones that I've used the most and seen used the most. There's different varieties of crushed stone paths, but they're essentially crushed stones, really small sizes, under a centimeter, and they sit together so tightly they become basically they like lock in and they become a hard, smooth surface. They're almost kind of like asphalt like. They're so solid. CDEC is something I've put in there. It's kind of a brand, but it's something that I've used, so I wanted to just mention it. It is a form of crushed stone. It's actually naturally decomposed granite, and it's quite a beautiful thing to look at. It doesn't reflect any light, which is great, and we're going to talk about lighting in a minute. It's very malleable again, and it can like mimic different types of earth. So you can see in the photos like the woodland ground, and you can get the sea deck, which is kind of like the reddish tone, and then you can get the grey one, which kind of looks a bit more like concrete. You can even get a darker brown one, which looks like mulch. So that's quite a good option. Sea deck is actually not as expensive as concrete or asphalt, but not um, it's not as cheap as the options that we're not supposed to use for accessibility, unfortunately. There's another kind of crushed stone that I'll mention, which isn't on the page, but it's called hoggin. It's also kind of it's also known as self-binding gravel, which is just a mixture of gravel, sand, and clay. And that's also a good option. It does the same thing. It becomes really, really like rock hard. And I've also put in recycled plastic timber because it's something that I've come across and I've used a bit as well in designs. And it's again another personal favorite. I'm sure you've come across recycled plastic timber boardwalks and thought that it's timber. Most nature reserves have these, and they're usually used in areas where there'll be lots of damp or water. Um, yeah, they're really easy to install. They're made of post-consumer plastic that otherwise would have gone to landfill. They're non-slip. They're easy to maintain. They're kind of make their cost up in their lifetime because they last a really, really long time, and it's easy to replace elements of them as well. So if anything needs to be replaced, that's pretty straightforward. And you can use these as footpaths. They don't have to just be boardwalks or over water. If you feel like your site is somewhere where it gets waterlogged very easily, this could be a good option. Next page, please. Yes, materials to avoid. So here are the materials to avoid, and sadly, they are some of the more lovely earth-friendly ones. But unless you're like willing to recruit an army of volunteers just for path maintenance, they aren't really going to be great for accessibility. Um, so brick pavers are actually concrete, so they're not great for the planet, but they do look great. And you can also use reclaimed bricks. Sorry, you shouldn't use them, but these are some options that are not that you can use if you can maintain, but better to avoid. Um, yeah, so the brick pavers and the concrete pavers, they will very likely buckle, or they will very likely move. The bricks are likely to crumble. Mulch, as you're likely aware, will kind of spread and not great for accessibility. Again, with kind of laying bricks and things like wood, likely that plants will grow in between those, and there'll be damage from water. I have to say, if you have the capacity to maintain pavers, they aren't a terrible option, especially as you can repair them far like better than if you have a full in situ concrete slab. But like I said, it's a lot of maintenance, and I know everyone's um not every like I know the nature of volunteering, and there's always more important things to do than be trimming grass between bricks of paving. Next page, please. So slopes and ramps. Um, for slopes, sorry, for ramps in particular, I would suggest finding someone who's got a bit of an idea of what they're doing. Um, I'm only saying that from a personal experience of trying to design ramps and always having to ask someone else. Um, it's a little bit tricky, but these are kind of the regulations for the UK of what the kind of sizes need to be. So we've got the 1 to 20 for ramps, and the 1 to 12 can be acceptable if 1 to 12 ratio can be acceptable if it's not a very high ramp. So like the one on the picture below, I think that might be a 1 to 12. Um, yeah, so these are the regulations, but just remember a ramp won't be used in the same way as a path. So you can get away with using minimum sizes because you're not going to necessarily need someone, a family aren't going to walk all up a ramp all lined up together, or someone on a wheelchair who might want to walk on a path next to a companion will be aware that on the ramp they're just going from A to B. So you can use the smaller width sizes for the ramps. Um, yeah, edge protection is really important, and that's not just for wheelchair users, it's for people who use a white stick as well. Otherwise, you can very easily twist an ankle on a slope or a ramp. Next page, please. How am I doing for time, Marta? Sorry.
Yeah, you're absolutely fine. Carry on.
Okay. So, yeah, I've included lighting in here because, first of all, it's like a passion project of mine, and the one I was designing, I was predominantly trying to design female safe and inclusive spaces. But yeah, so I've included it here because I think it's something that's often forgotten, but it's incredibly important. And again, I put the words female-led design here because most of the research done into lighting in the UK is post like the horrific Sarah Everard case. And it's since then that kind of councils have been focusing more on making safer spaces for women. Historically, like for the past 100 years or so, the outdoors is lighting has pretty much been the same, and it's kind of been focused on lighting for cars actually. So here are some examples of how you can improve lighting, and it's not just by making spaces feel safer for women, which is brilliant in itself, but it's kind of making everyone feel safer, and making spaces more accessible for everyone. Yeah, so a well-lit space doesn't really have to be very bright. In fact, as you can see from the quote on the top of the page, it's more about quality than quantity of lighting. Um, so it's in a way where like you don't create bright areas versus dark areas and contrast. You also consider materials that are being used, like the paths, so they don't kind of aren't too reflective and create glare, which especially when they're wet can be quite a problem and a distraction. Yeah, and we can go to the next page, Marta, which is also lighting, but yeah, yeah, and just being mindful about the way we use lighting in soft and hard landscape. Something as little as having some lights under benches or at, like particularly entry points where you're going in and out of the spot site, especially if you might be using a key and you're distracted. Like if you're getting into a community garden with a key or a passcode, it's really great to have that extra layer of security. And yeah, it creates a sense of comfort and safety for all users, really. There's so much I can say about lighting, but we've just covered it briefly here. And yeah, if you're interested, there's lots of amazing papers out there. You can get really, really geeky about it, or you can just use very simple approaches. Some of them are kind of here. Like the uplighting is quite good, especially if you are installing a new path. And that's quite nice for like the animal life that might be on your site there, because they're just kind of lighting the path itself instead of everywhere. Yeah, we could go to the next page. Yeah, so this is the last page, and I really wanted to talk a lot more about planting, but actually, I don't know that much about planting. So I'm more of a hardscape girl. Um, but in terms of the hardscaping for planting, you might want to think about having raised planters so that if somebody is seated, the plants are raised to eye level so that person can tend to those plants without bending or kneeling. Again, it's like just nicer for all the users to not have to bend or kneel um, too much. Obviously, um, it's a community garden, so there'd be lots of different variations of planting, but it's good to have options so everyone can be included. Yeah, and I think we all know how great it is to have somewhere to sit, but it's extra wonderful if that place you've got to sit is shaded, maybe from the sun or from the rain. And also like to think about where you're placing your seating. 'Cause I think often lots of people who use community spaces, community gardens, might be going there and meeting friends and might want to have like a little chat or a conversation and not be overheard. So I think having seating in places that are kind of planted is quite nice rather than just in open spaces, which is also nice as well. But yeah, just bearing in mind that there might be people coming who might be experiencing stress or trauma and might need a moment to themselves just to get away from the group. Yeah, and we've also got just to pop back to paths for a second. You can have handrails on paths, which I particularly love. Like I said, I've got perpetual vertigo, so I sometimes have to use a stick. And if there's a handrail, it's just like a magical aha moment where I feel really seen. So yeah, handrails on footpaths. They don't have to go all around the footpath. You can just have them at considered places. Um, yeah, and also when you're playing a footpath, as well as we mentioned the maintenance, but you can think about the edging that you might use. So there's a picture that up at the top of the page of the edging. Um, uh, I've in the past I've only really used steel edging, but you can get very hard plastics as well. The benefit of steel over plastic is kind of obvious. It's more long lasting, it doesn't off plastic, etc. But you need to just consider your budget, and that kind of stops the paths being, well, it gives them a bit more longevity, I guess. And I think the last thing I'll kind of talk about is lines of vision. So when you're planning, if you're thinking about who might use your site, and there might be families, or might be vulnerable people with caregivers, you might think that there's a playground here and there's like a place to sit here, and it's nice to merge those with the kind of lines of vision, being able to see each other, parents being able to see their children, or care, carers being able to see the people they've come in with. And in that kind of, it's kind of like opposite way, but you can create spaces which have lines of vision but aren't completely just open spaces. There's a picture, just the third picture there, which also kind of is joint with the picture below. If you're using like very soft planting, like rushes and things, you can still get that line of vision uh, with the added sense of privacy. And you could do this around seating as well. So to create these kind of safe feeling spaces without just being lawn or just being certain types of planters. You can achieve those with the types of plants you use. Um, yeah, I think that about sums it up, Marta.
That's great. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
I
Um,
think I went over, sorry.
no, that's absolutely fine. I'm keeping an eye on time. Don't worry. Does anybody have any questions for Mariam before she disappears? Because she has to go off to do other things. Any questions or comments? Hello, Hassan.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. We're just wrapping up a presentation, so yeah, just seeing if anybody's got any questions for Mariam. Oh, comments.
It's okay if you don't have questions now. I'm happy to receive emails. I also want to recommend a book for community gardens. Some of you might have heard of it. It's called Carrot City, and it's this wonderful book of various community gardens, rooftop gardens, vertical gardens, and it's all based on growing food. And it's just a lovely book for finding out about other community gardens in the world doing great things, and lots of beautiful pictures.
Great. I'll get the title from you and I'll circulate that with the notes from the meeting. And your slides as well. Great. If there's no questions right now, then we'll just say thank you, Mariam. And yeah, feel free to disappear whenever you need to. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to Rachel's presentation. Thanks, Mariam.
Thanks. Bye.
Everybody, I'm afraid I'm getting over a cold, so I hope you can all hear me all right. I'll try and speak clearly, but do say if it's a problem. I'm now going to try and share my screen. Okay, does that look good? So I work at TOE, the Trust for Oxfordshire's Environment. I'm just going to talk to you briefly about our community grants programme. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to talk about the details of some of the grants we've awarded to community growing spaces. Some of the things we'll touch on what Mariam's just said, actually. And clearly you can have an idea, but every idea costs money to then implement. So what we like to do is to have a chat with you at an early stage to check that your idea meets our funding criteria, and then we'll try and help you to get one of our grants. So a little bit about TOE. So TOE, the Trust for Oxfordshire's Environment, is Oxfordshire's independent environmental funder. So basically we raise money and we give it away in a bit of a Robin Hood kind of way. And our main aims are to halt the decline of nature and to restore its richness. And along with that, we like to connect people with nature. So clearly that's where community growing spaces come in, because sometimes that is the nature and the green space that particularly more urban environments have, and that's incredibly important. So you'll see that on the side of my slides, I've got different pictures from some of our recently funded projects. So that's a wonderful signpost in the Clanfield Community Orchard, which is was planted probably over the last 12 months or so. So what we fund is the capital work in projects that either protect and enhance places where you'll find nature, or create new natural spaces. And then, as I say, what we think is really important is connecting people with that nature and improving that access. So when I say capital work, what I mean is the things that we can fund are the things that you might have to buy. So Mariam's been talking about boardwalks and things like that. So you'll see that in the top picture, those are the Hinksey Trail volunteers. The Hinksey Trail runs through the Hinksey Nature Reserve. And what that particular group of volunteers do is improve the boardwalk, because it's a very wet sort of fenland type environment. So they have used recycled plastic, but what they have actually prefer to do is to use wood, And as one of them is a very clever engineer, he's come up with a way of doing that so that it's totally elevated above the ground surface, and it's the posts which are protected from the wet ground, and so they're the things that the volunteers have stopped rotting, because the bits that's in the air is actually not going to rot as quickly as what's in contact with the wet ground. So wood is much lighter to carry and move around than recycled plastic. So that's why they've decided as a group that that's their preferred material. Other sort of ways of improving access, it can be path surfaces, which I'll come on to, but it could be just a new gate, something as simple as that, a gate perhaps that's wider than your existing gate. So we have two types of grants in our local environment fund, which is our community grants programme. Our small grants are up to £1,000. And our standard grants go from £1,000 up to £15,000. So we can also offer grants up to £25,000, but that has to be for a really exceptional project. And because what we're all about is nature recovery, if you were telling me you were making a nature reserve, that's probably what our grant panel would consider to be exceptional rather than a community garden. So I'm going to give you a bit of information about our small grants and our standard grants. So to start with, you have to be a community group, a not-for-profit organisation. So that could also be parish council or a CIC, a community CIO. You don't have to have a constitution. And unlike a lot of funders, we don't insist that you're a registered charity or anything like that. Okay, so we like to give people money. We try to make it easy. So, and if you've got questions while I'm chatting, just please sort of say something. So our small grants of up to £1,000. So we welcome applications on a rolling basis. In other words, you can apply anytime. So as I say, please get in touch and have a chat with me, or let me come and visit you, and to make sure that your idea meets our funding criteria. And then once you've put in an application, we like to let you know within 2 or 3 weeks, depending upon staff availability really, what the outcome is. So you don't have to wait for very long. So let me give you a couple of examples of small grants. So at the Barracks Lane Community Garden, that some of you might know in East Oxford, they've had a small grant from us because they needed some more raised beds. And they were able to get 3 raised beds by their entrance area. And that all came in at less than £1,000. And so as soon as we awarded the grant, they were able to go out, order them, and the growers were able to get start planting really. Our standard grants of up to £15,000, we have a quarterly funding cycle for those. So our application deadline is always the first working Monday of the standard quarter at lunchtime, midday. And then we have about a 10-week period where we do due diligence, which we do initially in the office, and then one of our volunteers will be assigned a project within each funding round, and they go out and they meet the applicant and ask other questions. And they ask a set of standard questions which are reviewed alongside your application by our grant panel that always meets in the first or second week of the last month of the quarter. And then we let you know what the outcome is. So our next deadline is Monday the 6th of January. and everybody in that round will know the outcome by the middle of March next year. So it's quite a standard set of dates so that everybody knows where they stand every quarter. So the assessor, as I say, will visit you and ask you lots of questions. And then our grant panel debates each application and then makes a funding recommendation to our chief executive, who makes the final funding decision. So the key points for our grants is that our projects need to be in Oxfordshire, and the community needs to be right at the core of a project. So that means that everybody needs to benefit from the project, and we love it when projects are delivered by volunteers, and the sites that we fund need to have public access for 104 days a year, which is effectively either a Saturday, every Saturday and every Sunday in the year, 2 days a week, or 4 half days, or something a bit like that. So there's a picture of, it's actually a public footpath just outside Charlbury, but there's the handrail that Marion was talking about and some shallow steps. So these steps were put in by the Cotswold Voluntary Wardens, who are the volunteer group within the Cotswolds National Landscape Area. It's going to a nature reserve, but the principle is there in that it was a steep slope that got really slippery, and the long shallow steps with the handrail make it possible and much, much easier for people to get up and down. So at the top of the picture, you'll see that there's a bridge over a stream, and because it's a public footpath, Oxfordshire County Council paid for that bridge. So by working with the County Council and the volunteers, it's, you know, transformed the accessibility of a footpath. So some of these rules about what we can and cannot fund come to us from our funders. So in our local environment, there are normally 5 pots of money. It does depend from time to time because new funders join us and others leave. Most of the money we award as grants comes to us from Grundon, and it's effectively the tax they have to pay when waste goes to landfill. So because it's tax, it's regulated by HMRC, and that's why it's really important that everybody has a benefit. So that's where we can fund a community garden, but we can't fund an allotment. So a community garden where everybody's growing things and everybody has the opportunity to take the produce home is seen as for everybody. Whereas an allotment where one person takes that food to their house is not for the public good. So that's why HMRC, you know, have these different rules. So the Thames Valley Environmental Records Centre give us money a little bit for wildlife projects like the curlew that's standing there. South Oxfordshire District Council give us money from their Community Infrastructure Levy Fund. So that's only for projects within SODC's area at the moment. And we put in some of our own money that we raise from other parts of our work to make sure that we're supporting our community grants. And an important thing is that our grants are reimbursements. So if we award you a grant, we don't give you £1,000. What we say is you can spend £1,000 and then we'll reimburse you. But we don't want our rules, which are imposed on us by our funders, to cause anybody problems. And so we turn around grant claims every week or two, literally. It's an ongoing process so that nobody has a cash flow problem. Right, a few examples. So not lots of pictures, just a few words. So community orchards, a great way of engaging with your community, growing all sorts of different things. So in Deddington, in Clifton, actually just outside Deddington, the community orchard there, they wanted money for buying trees and all the things that go with planting trees. So that's what their grant was for. In Clanfield, they could raise the money for buying trees themselves, because people in their village wanted to give them money for trees. So they said to us, but actually there's a big ditch between the village street and the area of land where we're going to be planting the trees. Can you pay for a bridge that crosses the ditch so that people can get to our orchard? So at the back of the picture, I should have given you a picture of the bridge, really, shouldn't I? There's a fairly robust wooden bridge across the ditch, and that's what we funded at Clanfield rather than the trees themselves. So Bampton putting together a community orchard, and they will be applying for a grant. Their site is surrounded by tall hedges, and to improve the visual sight lines in and out of the site, and to make it more inclusive visually and physically, they will be asking us to pay for hedge laying around their orchard. So it's an example of how the community growing space is asking us to do something slightly different with their grant application. So community gardens, I've already mentioned Barracks Lane, and this is a picture of Bridge Street. I'm assuming that perhaps, as they're such wonderful CAG members, you might have heard Tila or others, Linda, talk in other meetings. So one of the things that Mariam said was the different heights of planters, and that's something that we found both as a funder who's been involved with Barracks Lane and Bridge Street. That's really important. So Tila first had quite low planters like the one in the photograph there. And the second grant that she came to us for was for higher ones, to make it easier if you've got a bad back or you're in a wheelchair, and then you're not having to stoop. And the other interesting thing to consider, and both gardens have come up with this, is how far people have to stretch across to do something. So if you're using raised beds, you don't want them to be very wide, because people won't be able to easily reach until the middle. You need to have that good firm path all the way round so that it's accessible from every side. The grant that we gave to the Peace Oak Orchard, which is in Ensham, was for a pump for their borehole, so that they could, a solar pump, so that they could extract water to water everything that they were growing. So it's thinking outside the box sometimes. You might not need raised beds, you might not need other bits and bobs, but how are people getting their water to look after the garden? And the Cuckoo Pen, which is going to be a new community garden in Benson, the grant that we've awarded them is for a whole lot of tree work in their perimeter trees. So some of them are willows because they're by a stream, and we're paying for some of the willows to be pollarded, and some other hedge work as well. So public parks, just quickly, because these aren't necessarily growing spaces, but it's community areas. So the Scouts in Oxford have been one of the many different community groups who've been planting up pollinator-friendly flower beds by 4 of the 5 entrances into Headington Hill Park. So when the Friends of Headington Hill Park came to us, they said, we hope that perhaps 100 people might be involved with our project. And actually it's been more than 250 people who've got involved. And they've made all sorts of different new connections with businesses in their community, who now provide them with sponsorship, and other sort of groups like the Islamic Centre at the end of the Marston Road. So in Florence Park, we have provided grants to what's now called, the name's just gone out of my head, Kate's Place, which is by the tennis courts, if you know Florence Park. Florence Park, anybody can go there within opening, sort of the park's opening hours. But the special thing there is that there are no dogs in this community garden area that's now called Kate's Place. And we're talking to the town council that, at Farringdon about their plans for a community growing space in the Farringdon Town Park at the back of the library by the car park. Getting into places is incredibly important. So we gave Oxford City Farm a grant to put down the Hoggin type path that Mariam mentioned. We call it MOT type 1, but it's self-binding gravel. So it created a pedestrian access, and there's a pedestrian gate, because until they had their grant from us, the only access into Oxford City Farm was the vehicular access. And many of the people who go there just had one pair of shoes, and in wet weather or in the winter, the path, because of the vehicles going backwards and forwards, was getting very muddy. And so that was a barrier, because people didn't want to walk through the mud and make their shoes wet and muddy. So we created that new path alongside the vehicle track to make it a drier way into the city farm. I can't remember who it was. Somebody's at Cutslow. There's a path around the woodland, the community woodland there. Similar sort of thing. If you want to see paths, I can tell you where we funded things, and you can go and see what it looks like, 5 years, 1 year afterwards, and see how well that path is bedded in and what it looks like, because sometimes that helps you make a decision. And then I've added the Wolvercote Community Orchard. If you know where it is, it's the little community orchard across the road from the Trout pub by Godstow Bridge. And they came to us because they wanted a path for disabled access, which is made out of those sort of cells of plastic where the grass grows through. They didn't want to lay anything in an aggregate way, because their orchard was already established. So that's what their grant funded. So that's a bit of a whistle stop. Thank you for listening. And do you have any questions now? And if you want to think about it and mull it over, then there's my email address and our phone number. What I should have put on there, of course, was our website address, but you can guess that from my email address, can't you? So
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, does anybody have any questions? No.
blinded everyone with science. Okay, well, please circulate my slides, and I'll put any questions in the chat. Oh, there is something in the chat.
Oh yeah, Hassan. Yeah, go ahead, Hassan.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go on, yeah.
Yeah, just one question. It's like, for us, we were starting a community garden in Blackbellies, and I'm just listening all that kind of things. We're brand new to it in the area that in Blackbellies where we live, and we have now it's called allotment, but it's going to be sharing a lot of community come together and grow stuffs. And at the moment, we need a lot of stuff because we need tools, we need all those kind of things. Is that one of your funding? Is that tick that boxes?
Yes, absolutely. We would be able to help you with parts of those bits to get to, put together a shopping list, and let's have a chat, and I can let you know what we'll be able to fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Hassan. Yeah, so just to kind of double check, Rachel, even if people are not at a stage of maybe submitting the application, they can just reach out to you on your email and ask a few questions. Is that
absolutely? Yes, please help. And the other thing that we always say to the people we give money to is, would you be willing to talk to other people in the future if they come to us? Because everybody has ideas, but I don't mean this to sound the wrong way, but somebody else will have had that idea before and will have done something that's very similar. And so you can learn from them about what works and what doesn't work. And that really helps you, because sometimes it makes it easier, because the hardest thing is knowing where to start and how to get something up and running. And if someone can say, oh, I did that and that was not good, but this was brilliant, and then you can take that learning. And so we like to connect people if we can.
Yeah, that's great, Rachel. And I think maybe I'll get that list of at least a few different paths around Oxfordshire that you've funded, and I think that'll be good to circulate, and then people will know to look out for those when you're kind of out walking and visiting other places. And yeah, I think you're right. It's nice to see what it looks like sort of a few years down the line as well. I think that'd be really useful.
Good.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Thanks for joining us. Are you staying? Are you whizzing off?
No, I'm happy to stay. If
Brilliant.
anybody has any other questions, then let me know, and I'll be interested to listen to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll cover the last bit that will be recorded and then we'll move on to some discussions. So the next point is the community right to grow motion. How many of you are aware of what that means? No, yes, a little bit, a little bit. Okay, mixture. So I'll say what I think it is, and I think Jess, you nodded, and Ruth. So if you've got things to add, just please do so. But effectively, it's the idea that local authorities can pass a motion to encourage and enable communities to grow, to do community growing projects more easily by sort of implementing a set of measures, such as publishing a land registry that shows what bits of land are available for community growing, making the process easier for communities to apply for the land, more affordable, and so on. So a motion like that was passed in Hull, I think a year or two ago. And there has been this idea in Oxford that we could have a similar motion as well. There is also there's some work done nationally to pass it at the national level, but whilst that's sort of rumbling through at a much slower pace, people more locally have been trying to get it passed on a kind of city council and county council level. So when I heard about this when I joined CAG, and I admit it sort of slipped on my agenda, so I actually just looked into it again a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, before actually I give you an update, Ruth and Jess, did you have anything to add on what I just covered, or is that a sufficient kind of overview, do you reckon?
Yeah, sorry, good for me.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah. So yes, I emailed a city councillor to get an update and say, we've got a draft here which some people have worked on and we'd like to sort of propose it to the council. Well, it turns out that they've already done it. But very quietly in July 2023, apparently they did pass a motion. And I have it here actually. I'll just pull it up for everybody to see. So yes, this was passed in July 2023. So the council resolved to adopt this motion supporting a community right to grow. And here are some specific points about it. So they have recognized the importance of locally produced food to provide affordable and healthy options for local people. They've noted the physical and mental health benefits of especially community gardening. They've noticed the success of various local projects like Greening Jericho and Edible Streets, which Kuhu is representing on the call tonight. And the Community Right to Grow campaign launched by Incredible Edible. I should have mentioned that was kind of where the idea originated, the National Incredible Edible Network. And the Oxfordshire Food Strategy, you'll be happy to know, Jess, was also mentioned. And it said the council believes that the benefits from public spaces, which are cared for by local people and can be used to produce food, is self-evident, etc., etc., seem to have a positive impact. The 2 or 3 really specific things that this asked for was that the leader of the council write to the city's 2 MPs to ask them to show their support for the community right to grow in Parliament, so more nationally, and also that they provide a clear register of unused public land so that can be offered to community groups for cultivation, and also that they come up with a robust and simple process to do that. I have not yet followed up with this councillor to find out what they've actually done, but we do know a little bit through Kuhu's work and the Edible Streets work, because they actually have been doing some practical work in terms of the simple process and actually implementing that. And we have inquired about the register. We haven't had a response yet. I haven't asked about the kind of them writing to the Parliament, which I think is actually less impactful on us sort of immediately anyway. I was happy to see that they passed it. I think it's quite weak, and the draft that actually got prepared by community groups together later on, who were unaware that this had already been passed, even though they worked with another councillor. So there was another councillor who just wasn't aware that this had already happened. Was actually much stronger and had much sort of more solid provisions. So I think it's a bit of a shame because actually it doesn't have a lot of power in my view when I look at it. But from another angle, you know, it's got something to give us to go back to the city council and say you have passed this motion, you sort of support community growing in principle at least, and what are you actually doing to do so? And the other thing is that this, as far as I know, it's only been passed at the city council level, not the county council. So that is something that I think we should press for again. And I mean, this is up for discussion. Maybe we can have a bit of a conversation if people have an opinion on that. But I guess for me, I see sort of two paths right now, either going straight to the county council and saying, you know, the city council's passed this. We've actually got this brand new draft, which is a little bit more robust. Would you be interested in proposing this to the county council as well? Or actually, we wait a little bit to see what the city council's responses in terms of the practical application of it. We learn a little bit from how this is done or not done anything for us on the city council level, and then that perhaps gives us a little bit more knowledge as to how it should be phrased to have a bit more power, a bit more sort of teeth. And then we go to the county level and inquire about that. So stop sharing the screen. And Deborah, I see your hand raised. I was just going to ask, Kuhu, are you still on the call? Because maybe you had a bit of an update on this practical aspect, if you can share that.
Yes. Hi. So we have been working with the county council. Actually, the Edible Street has majorly been funded by the county council for us. It's been the public health department, and so even the licensing, we're obviously working with the highways, but again, the push comes from county council. Even like for us, city council has come into the fold very recently as well. So yeah, I mean, even for us, it was quite a lovely surprise that they've already passed something like this, and that our project's on there. But yeah, so what we're doing is trying to create a licensing model. We are focusing more on land that's owned by the council, which is near people's homes. So that kind of comes more towards street like verges and footways and stuff like that. So we're just trying to focus on how we can get some sort of planting activities happening on this land. And yeah, so those are the licensing models that we're working on, the practical application of it. Yeah, I think that's from my side. That's what I have, but to hear more.
And that's just to sort of clarifying, that's to do with how people would actually, or communities would actually go and apply for land, isn't it? It's sort of making the process simpler. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. I think the city council wants to do it more like a lease. So basically, people would lease out land. Again, we're still working out how that would work. And for highways, it would be like a skip license or a drop curb license. Basically, people just go online and apply for it. And if they meet all the criteria, they get permission to do this. And it can be different ways. So even for, I think there already exists something like the tree planting in Oxfordshire. So the county council does have it's sort of like an application you can go and just apply to plant a tree outside your house in a grass verge or something. So similar, but with actually putting up either planters or other forms of, using that land.
Great, thank you. That's really useful to hear. I've got Deborah and Jess with their hands raised. So Deborah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was trying to understand the role of the districts as opposed to the county, and who slightly answered that. I wonder if rolling it out to the other districts might be really useful, because they're the ones with the finger on the pulse of planning, basically, and housing developments or any kind of building, and whether we could push them to include in any form of change of use or new development, anything that comes through planning, to think about food growing as well.
Mm.
And I wonder what was meant by unused public land, because I've looked at our local park at Hinksey and wondered for years why they keep planting perennials and why we're not growing food there instead. Even things like blackberry, blackcurrant bushes or raspberry bushes would be pretty and then also edible.
Mm.
But I'm nervous of generating more work for us.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be useful maybe to collectively think about how a group might engage. Oh, well, I suppose there's Friends of Hinksey Park. Yeah, anyway, so I think maybe our parks could be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, just lots of thoughts really.
No, yeah, thanks, Deborah. And obviously this is like quite a quick update, and we might want to discuss it further by email or another time and so on. But I think the parks one is actually a really good thought. I've been working with another group in Blackbird who are thinking about putting planters in the park, and we're a bit like, how do we go about this? Because I think the sort of priorities of the parks departments are very different. So anyway, I think it's all really useful in the role of districts as well and planning. Jess, did you want to bring in your question?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing this. I also had absolutely no idea it'd been passed either, so that's news for me. I just wanted to highlight that the bit about sorry, I can't remember the wording, but doing some mapping of unused growing spaces. So Good Food Oxfordshire, I think it was mentioned, the food action plan. We are working with City Council on a bit of a mapping piece. Because it's in their local food action plan is to carry out some mapping of potential growing spaces. But we've also come up with that problem about how you quantify what is a potential growing space and who needs to be part of that. Is that planning or is that somebody else, which other team? So there is this mapping happening, I guess, to say, and we really did want to make sure we're linking up with anyone else that's either doing this piece of work or that we're not replicating work. So it's very early stages yet, but I do know that City Council are keen to do this anyway. So it's good that these things are all being sort of linking up.
That is great. Thanks, Jess. And it's kind of also hilarious that, you're mentioned in it, but you didn't know about it. You're working on it.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah,
it's
exactly. So
actually
thank you for that.
But yeah, and I think that it would probably be quite useful for you to link up with Kuhu and Mina and Edible Streets if you haven't already. Kuhu, you've got your hand raised. Do you want to come in?
Hi, sorry, I just had I mean, I think you answered it a little bit. You're not very sure what you mean by, unused land and where you can potentially grow. So what I understand, maybe it's more of like park, I think city council owns a lot of like park and land, like unused land in the park is what we kind of gathered. So is that something that's true? I'm not very sure that, so it's a question for you actually.
Yeah, go on, Jess.
Was that for me, Mal?
Yeah, probably more than anyone else probably currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were wanting to go even beyond parks, which is, I guess, what you're doing. Is there any spaces that could be potential? It's sort of public land that could be potential for growing. So maybe it's, what were they? I mean, maybe it's sort of places of worship, like land around churches. Maybe it's about I don't know, disused car parks. It could be rooftops. There's all sorts of sort of ways that you could quantify it, but it's but obviously then you need sources of water, sunlight, soil, all those kind of things. So I think there's quite a lot of variables, and I'm not sure I know the exact answer, but we have to sort of try and define it some way. Otherwise, it could be a huge, never-ending project.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that, but Ruth, you wanted to add something?
Oh, I just wanted to say that on a local parish level, we're kind of acting as if we have got the right to grow because the parish council are totally on board. And actually, that's what I'm engaged to do, is use the public spaces with the community for food growing. So it's kind of different model to the community garden setup. And it has its pros and cons, I think. We're still just working out what we're doing and what we're trying to do and what's not going to work. So the questions it throws up for me is, you go around planting fruit bushes or creating beds, and is that sustainable? And yeah, I've always got qualms about making extra work in a few years' time should the project fail for low-paid council labourers and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of questions just saying that people can plant willy-nilly on council land, but we're on it. We're trying to work it out between us, aren't we?
Yeah, no, that's interesting to hear, Ruth. And I think again, maybe there's something where we can bring those conversations together. Jess, maybe there's like a almost like a workshop type meeting that we can call specifically for this, and have you there, Ruth, and a lot of others who have tried it, and you'll have sort of practically informed ideas about how this would work. I think for me, there's different pieces to it, because just compiling a register is slightly separate to then worrying about how it's going to get used. I think that's just giving you sort of information that you can then use to think about how it's going to do it. And I guess in terms, Deborah, I see your hand. Just in terms of the kind of definitions of it, I mean, again, I can see a phased approach. There's why not just start with the parks and verges and then see how that goes, rather than kind of get blocked by the kind of enormity of what it could be. I think that might be a helpful approach potentially. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder whether there's Jess, we can maybe reconnect after this and think up an idea for a workshop or something like that. Deborah,
That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I tried to get the council planted some trees on a no ball games in this area patch of grass next to some council maisonettes, 5 minutes walk from where I live. And within a year, 11 out of 15 of them had died, and they were just ornamental trees. And I'd written to the local councillors to say, why didn't you plant fruit trees? I mean, this was an ideal opportunity. You were planting trees. And the response from the officers was they attract vermin, pigeons and rats, and we wouldn't do that. I mean, the trees weren't looked after because they weren't planted with the community. They were imposed on the community. And so for me, that's an example of how all the policy passing in the world is not going to enable our city council to do what needs to be done. It's going to be really interesting to see what their response is to, we'd like to grow fruit in your parks. Well, our parks, what am I saying? So I have no illusions at all about how this is going to work out. So Ruth, it will be particularly interesting if you've got a parish council with a political will to see how these issues are worked around. And I think it will be about the community taking control and not letting the council decide for us, because it's our land at the end of the day.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Laura, did you want to come in?
Yes, so I have a question for Rachel about the toll grant, and the question would be: would you fund schools?
Sorry,
that's the question.
Mute. Yes, we can now fund schools. We couldn't before because of the rule that means that everything has to be accessible, because school grants aren't always accessible. But I said that now we're putting some of our own money into the local environment fund for community grants. And we believe that it's really important for kids to understand about where food comes from and also understand about nature. So, for example, we funded a pond dipping platform around the primary school at Sandhills earlier this year. The pond was already there. There's a school at Berensfield where there isn't a pond, but there's a soggy bit in their playground. And so we're working with them so that they can dig a pond. That teacher at Berensfield also wants to put in beds for growing food, veg, and with the kids so that they can then eat it. So I think it's really important, and yes, we can. As long as there's the money there, we'll love to give it to that sort of project.
Exactly what I was thinking. Yes, okay. Thanks, Ray. And I have a comment, if I may. So since we're talking about growing, I think there is a lot of expertise behind growing, and a lot of, so most of the time it's not just about the capital, but also it's literally paying someone who knows what to do and when to do it. And and I know that Tall Grants doesn't fund revenue and people time, but I just wanted to ask to this group, how, so do you feel the same? So, and how do we kind of solve this problem of, I think we need grower, and grower needs to be paid. So yeah. Any idea?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, does anybody, do people want to speak to that? If you do, maybe just raise your hand and we'll see how many people have questions to this perennial problem that we're all facing all the time. I think Kuhu, have you got?
Hi, yeah, just two things. I'm sorry. One thing was, I think you did mention that, this needs to be a project that's led by the community. And I think that's exactly how we've gone about it. So like for us, the community actually designed their project, their planters, they designed what plants go in there. We were just sort of like facilitators in the entire process. Um, so I think, yes, just saying that, there's a park there and we've put some planters there, you can go use it, might not be the best way. Like, Deborah was mentioning the trees in the street, and people don't really know what to do with it. So as long as we ask them what they like, they have opinions, and mostly we found that people really do want to get involved. Especially if it's easily accessible. Secondly, about the information, like you was talking about having the knowledge. So I'll just put this in, just for all of you. We did work on a how-to guide last year, so we kind of put all of this information of what you can grow, how you need to grow it, what do you need, how do you create a community group to kind of get together and work in your street. All of the information about the tools that you might need, which plants can be grown at what time of the year, things like that. So we've created that. Again, it was a county council funded project, and it's published out there, and it's just called How to Guide, like Edible Streets How to Guide. So again, we focus on footpaths and grass verges, but basically the basic information is the same of how you can grow edible plants. So yeah, if that's helpful, just thought I'd put it out there.
Yeah, thanks, Kuhu. I will add that to the circulation notes at the end. And I have to say, I mean, a lot of people here have been doing these sorts of projects for a long time, and so have I. But even so, I think that guide is really useful. It's really thorough. So yeah, I'll definitely circulate it. Dan?
Speaking for Stonehill, growing isn't the issue. Rabbits, water, other pests take over, and you can follow YouTube and whatever. It's the people that matter. It's how you organize decision making, and management is 99% of it. The growing bit is an excuse for getting together, but it's the people who matter, and the success or failure is how you manage the people who come. We don't get hung up on produce, how much you grow. You're never going to grow enough to sustain ourselves. It's nice, but it's icing on the cake.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think, different projects have different priorities around that, I guess, but definitely people are at the heart of it all. Rachel, did you want to come in?
I wanted to say, yeah, I'm really sorry that we can't fund people's salaries. We say that we can fund up to sort of 10% of what you ask us for, and that's not enough. And we know that, and it's tough, but the people who give us money to give away let us take 7.5% for our own costs. So we're not covering our own costs, which is why we can't cover other people's salaries. So it's just one of those evil things. Some groups are really quite good at finding money from other places, and very often it's going, if it's in towns, then going to local businesses and asking, because if you don't ask, you don't get. And sometimes there can be synergy with what you want to do. Sometimes it's just because it's a large local employer and they're quite happy to help because they're their staff go there at lunchtime, or they work there, or they're your volunteers, or whoever it might be. And then there are always people like the district councillors who have pots of money of their own. They get given a fairly small amount every financial year, but they can give it to things that they like. It's what they want. And if you ask them, particularly if you ask them in April and then you ask them again in March, kind of thing. So you get in early at the beginning of the financial year, and then you ask them again towards the end of the financial year if there's anything that they can give you when you know how many people are involved.
Thanks, Rachel. Can I just clarify, did you say you can, out of the grants that you give out, up to 10% can actually cover the sort of admin time that goes into that? Or yeah, people
Correct.
can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Thank you. Okay, we're sort of running out of time slightly, but that's okay, because the last part was going to be giving people the opportunity to talk about an issue that's alive for you. And I think, Laura, you brought that issue up. And as I say, I think it is a perennial one for all of our projects. I wonder whether maybe that's something that we come back to at the next Collaborate in March, and just have a sort of a knowledge exchange and brainstorming session where we, invite people to share where they have been successful, but also maybe just think a little bit more systemically. Deborah and I met a few months ago and chatted about this very problem, and I'm not sure that we came up with a solution straight away, but I feel like maybe if we have a bigger pool of people, we can at least kind of gather more information from more projects and think about how to do it on a more sustained basis. Because yes, there are pots of money, but it's just the time that goes into applying for them, and scrambling around for £500 here and £1,000 there is a drain on all of our resources. So I think we all know that we need something a bit more sustainable and sustaining for us. So yeah, I don't know what the feeling is about kind of making that a topic for the next one. Deborah, you had your hand raised.
No, well, I just wanted to share some very happy news, which is we got some connected community funding we just heard today. And in fact, they rang us up and said, could we use a little bit more than we'd applied for, because they've come to the end of their financial whatever. They've got a deadline to spend it, and they've got some left in the pot. And it was simply because we're near the city centre, and there are very few places for people to grow food in the city centre in Oxford. So, and that is to cover both a community grower and outreach. So that is a revenue fund, which is just, I'm so excited about. So it feels a little bit like when you're on a dating website, there's a bit of a numbers game. You just have to try and try and try again. And one day you'll be successful if you're lucky. So a little bit of rejoicing going on at last.
That's great news. Congratulations.
Yeah,
What did you
yeah.
say it was? Connected Community?
It's the Connected Communities Fund. We actually applied for something else, and they passed us on to someone else. So that's the other thing, Rachel, you really inspired me, because you need to remember that the funders really want to help. So, and it really comes across from you that that's true, and there is money out there. So, so this was also an extraordinary thing, that we applied for something and they said, well, we can't help, but we're going to pass your request on to another fund, and they were able to help. So we were, doubly blessed.
That's great. Thanks, Deborah. I'm actually going to stop recording now, because we're nearing the end, and we're just going to do some informal goodbyes, but that's a really good note to end the recording on. So thanks for sharing.